Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. I don't really know when you're watching this. Man, I am going to be taking on a very weird project today. I'm gonna try to make a center console lid. Yeah, you guys have seen those epoxy tables where they have like the live edge wood, much like this, and it's cut into two pieces and there's epoxy in between. It looks kind of like a river or whatever. I don't know what to call it. I think they're called epoxy river tables, hence the name. The point is that I was looking at those and I've wanted to make one of those tables for a while, but then since I'm so involved and so engulfed in this current project, I'm like, yeah, let's do that for the truck. I don't think this is gonna work at all, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna do my absolute best, and whether or not this video even makes it to YouTube will be something to attest to. Probably won't. But I'm trying to have good faith and I'm feeling confident about it right now. Not that confident. About the same way I felt before I started the bumper. I have never done this before. I'm better at working with metal than I am wood. But the idea here, take this piece of wood, it's a piece of live edge wood, split it down the middle, and then rather than using this nice, soft, amazing leather center console cover, I basically just take the wood and I turn it into a center console, but with epoxy in the middle. I mean, I got other plans too. I'm gonna put lights in it because I have a problem with lights. I like lights. The point is that this is probably the last crazy thing that I'm gonna do to the dually. I still got a couple of other things that I'm gonna make. I think this is probably pushing it as far as like overdone. This is it right here. I think this is it. I think we've hit it. So yeah, this is gonna be interesting. And if you're new to what's going on, I'm rebuilding a truck from 74 Auto. Basically, I've been rebuilding a truck I got from them and I'm trying to make it really nice and crazy. Between like the Rolls-Royce headliner and like, you know, everything else, it's pretty ridiculous. There's a lot of lights in it. And I think this is a good place to draw the line. So I've got my handy dandy temporary before I move work table back out. And I'm going to attempt to make my center console with stuff that I've never done before, so I guess we'll see how that goes. And in today's video, we're gonna be working a lot with epoxy, which if you don't know anything about, it takes a lot of time and patience to set up, and it's pretty darn expensive. And in the midst of filming this, I had just poured some epoxy. So thankfully, World of Tank Blitz wants to help support the channel, and in turn, I get to play this sweet game.
Lord, baby, Dan, you all over the place, baby. I said, Dan, what are you doing? Lord, baby, Dan, what are you doing, baby? I'm a pioneer!
As some of you guys may know, I am a man of tactics. If outnumbered, I will outsmart my enemies. And let's be honest, I'm in a tank. See, we all know I love tanks. That's not a surprise. There are a lot of tactics you can use when inside of a tank. But you see, I prefer strategy and precision to kill my enemies.
Firing main cannon.
You have to be smart to win World of Tanks Blitz. That's why most of you casuals will never survive. But this isn't like any other game you've ever played before. And I'm speaking from experience. While this game is available for iOS and Android, I've played it on the computer a little bit. And do you know why? Because tanks are cool as shit. Play like a lone wolf or with your friends. Research your vehicle, upgrade your tanks, 7 minutes per battle, 7 versus 7 tank on tank action. If that doesn't get you tungsten hard, I don't know what will. But having that power from a mobile device, well, let's be honest, it gets me places. When you install the game from my link below, you'll get a special bonus for new players. Tank T1 E6, 7 days of a premium account. Would I steer you wrong? Don't just outsmart your enemy. Outsmart the world.
Cowabunga!
Best job I never had. My resin should be done drying. Let's go. So I guess the general idea behind this is actually pretty simple. I've seen a couple of YouTube videos on how to do this, which makes me an expert. No, I'm sure I'm gonna mess this up and you guys are gonna correct me in the comments. You always do. So I've got the center console lid, which has got the handle in it. I've got the cover, which kind of just covers that, and then it's, you know, that's all that is. I haven't really thought this through very much. So this is really the piece that we need because this kind of has the appropriate shape and I kind of know how everything goes. And then this has the actual clipping mechanism on it. I'll need that as well. The rest of this I'll just use for measurements as far as height and depth, but I really hope that it turns out well. I mean, if not, I just wasted a bunch of money. It's no big deal. It's just money, you know? It's just money. Okay, so first things first is to debark the current piece of wood that I have. I have a wire wheel that I'm gonna throw on my angle grinder with safety glasses, a respirator, and definitely some gloves because this thing slings little pieces of metal. Now normally I would recommend a respirator when dealing with anything like MDF and whatnot, but since this is probably just gonna be bigger particles, particle filter will probably do just fine. All right, that wasn't really as bad as I thought it was gonna be. And it smells awesome. It smells a lot like my grandfather's house. Back when my grandfather was alive and he lived in Minnesota, he was always working with wood, and his basement always had this very familiar wood smell to it. Kind of nostalgic. I'm sure people are gonna be like, hey, why'd you get rid of the bark? The bark looks cool. And I agree, I think the bark looks pretty cool. However, bark is brittle and it's not really attached to the tree. It grows on the tree, but it's not really attached per se. So, had to shave it off because you want the epoxy to have something to adhere onto and be strong. And yes, this will be stained. And by the way, this is me winging it. Like, I've watched a couple videos and I've learned some stuff and I've talked to a couple of people who do woodworking, but I am no means a professional. I wouldn't even suggest like listening to what I'm saying. However, I am gonna cut this thing into 2 pieces. And we'll get our old handy dandy ruler out. This thing's about 15 inches, a little less than 15 inches. Actually, it's closer to 14 inches. Go a little bit above, I want some play. So maybe 2 pieces at 17 inches. Do we have enough wood here? Perfect. Now, under normal circumstances, I would use a marker to mark how far I want her to go, but since this is wood, wood will stain. So if I were to use a Sharpie, it would actually stain the wood. My bandsaw is a little bit too small. I need a bigger one. Looks like I'm using a regular saw. That's my bad. Should have double checked that. So I did splinter off here, so I'm just gonna move my cut line up here. That way we won't have damaged wood. All right, so here we have our 2 similar pieces of wood. And now the next step is, there's a couple different ways that I can approach this. Make a box for it, pour the epoxy while this is on it, and have it kind of fill this void and really adhere to this shape. And that way, it's all one big uniform piece. And as long as I can get it looking flush on the sides, it doesn't matter if there's any voids in the middle. So I'm gonna be doing this whole bit with a router. Usually when you see these epoxy tables, it's like this. Smaller side on the bottom, wider side on the top. And I think that's the way I'm gonna go here. Because that way it kind of gives you that depth. It shows you what's going on versus you lose that depth this way. So now we just need to set the width. How wide do we want to go? This way, when we go to put the handle in or pour around the handle, I don't know how I'm gonna do that. So now actually I think what I might do is cut this whole section out here with the Dremel, this huge chunk of plastic, so I don't have to bevel my edges that much. Right now we have a little bit more room to play with here. Using my router, I'm going to cut these edges out right here for the back of this to fit flushly in. Definitely died at some point or another. I don't know, I did a lot of routing and sanding and smoothing, go figure. Here's where I'm at right now. I've got this center piece kind of cut out. I'm just keeping this piece connected for the meantime because I want the rigidity until I kind of mount everything up. But this part is kind of important for the clip that goes in here. So I'll leave that for right now. These clips are gonna go in down here and seal. That'll kind of like adhere everything to this thing. I think the best way to do this is actually to have this side facing down because it's flat. It's already planed on both sides. When I go to pour my epoxy, I'll build just like a little soft box around here and have it sealed up with silicone and tape and whatnot to make sure everything keeps good. And then I'll just kind of pour the epoxy in this channel up until it's about flush with here and let everything be nice and solid. The biggest concern right now for me is the clip. And since we're not using the top part, we have to find a way to mount this clip in here. So I think maybe if I just epoxy this in place with it, you know, I'll have to kind of scallop out the wood a little bit so this can fit in here, kind of, you know what I'm saying? Then I don't know if the appropriate action is to just seal this up really tight and then epoxy around it so it's all held in place. I don't know. I'll put it in that, we'll figure it out as we go pile. All right, so now we have the general, I guess, shape of how this is gonna play out. Little clippy boy needs to go in here somehow. Okay, I think that's how I'm gonna do it right there. I think what I'll do is I'll end up sealing this whole thing off with some like tape or something like that to where I can pour the epoxy and then pull this whole thing out maybe. I don't really know. But I definitely think that pouring the epoxy around it is gonna be the best option. I first started messing with epoxy when I started doing knife handles. Here was basically a blank that I was testing out with just some epoxy and acrylic powder. I didn't mix it up very well on purpose because I wanted to see if I could create like designs in it. This is supposed to be like a jellyfish pattern. And it's nice and clear, but there's some color in here to diffuse the light. So take some light, put behind it. You see how it still shines right on through? Kind of diffuses that. It's like direct light source, light diffusion, right? So that's kind of the idea with this is I'll mix it up pretty well though, so it's pretty consistent across. I don't really want any patterns in it, I don't think anyway, because I wanted to be able to change colors with the rest of the truck. But if I take like this one, this is really thick, completely opaque. This is a little bit in between both. We still get some good light shine through here. So this is kind of like the look I'm going for. Nothing too crazy, nothing that's gonna blind me, you know? But yeah, so that's the idea. All right, so what I'm gonna do, use some 5-minute epoxy and epoxy these two pieces together, then using clamps just kind of give them a good way to bond. Give this a little bit to set up, and then we'll come back and yeah. Got everything basically the way I need it to, tack down here. Using my silicone, I got some silicone here. I'm just kind of jamming in all the cracks to make sure there's no leaks to where the epoxy can get in. I'm really hoping that the silicone can prevent the epoxy from leaking in while it cures. It should be fine. Should be the key word. But we'll let this sit here and dry for a little while until it's, you know, dry to the touch, and then make sure that our seal looks good, and then we'll start pouring the epoxy. I've got it all kind of set up in my jig, ready for pouring. What I need to do is create a pretty tight seal around the whole thing. So what I'm gonna do is basically create a very ghetto version of a sealed box to pour the epoxy in. You should not use MDF. You shouldn't use what I'm gonna do. I'm doing this specifically because I'm being super lazy. And I think this will still net me the results that I want. My only concern being that it's gonna stick to the MDF and I'll probably have to like sand that completely off, which I'm cool with. Yeah, whatever. Since I had so much extra material on front and back and sides, I just kind of used this I drilled into the actual just material. Silicone is kind of like a gasket in between to hopefully create like a watertight seal, keeping the epoxy from getting in anywhere. I've also taped off completely the handle to keep it from getting any sort of epoxy in there as well. We'll see how that turns out. I don't have much faith. We'll mix up the epoxy and pour it in here. I'm gonna let this sit up for just a second, but even in a gel state, it should keep any sort of epoxy from moving through the cracks. And I'm not fully committed in this idea, and I'm not sure if it'll even work. Don't trust me right now, right? Normally I feel like I tell you guys like, hey, trust me, this is gonna work out great. Don't do that right now. Unless you've seen the product at the end and you're like, that looks good, then don't trust me. And this is the epoxy we're gonna be using. This is West Systems, 2-part. I've used this stuff a lot before when I do the knife making stuff, which I will be continuing very shortly. 1 pump of this and 1 pump of this. This is the special super clear hardener. This one shines up like glass. I wanted to be super clear without any sort of discoloration. I've used their 205 and their 206 before. The 205 definitely has like a yellowish tint to it. The 206, which is a slower hardener, I believe, if I remember correctly, that one still has a slightly yellowish tint to it, but not nearly as noticeable. Had I not been mixing this with white, I would have gotten just the regular 206. This stuff is definitely more expensive. The depth of this is about 2 inches deep in the crevice here. Using epoxy like this, when it cures, it's called exothermic reaction. It creates heat. Really, they want you to pour about 1/4 inch at a time. They say no more than 1/2 inch at a time because then it can start melting stuff. I probably would be annoying and just do 1 inch at a time, but I do have plastic here, and plastic will melt under heat, go figure. That means what I'll be doing is pouring about 1/2 inch at a time, and then every 3 hours come in here, mix up another 1/2 inch batch, and then pour another 1/2 inch. Yeah, you gotta be kind of careful with this stuff. It does get very hot. It can set stuff on fire. And then I'm gonna be mixing whatever mixture I have with a little bit of white acrylic powder. This is the color and brand that I'm using, called Titanium by Artisan. 1 squirt of this per 1 squirt of that. And I'm gonna mix it up for a hot minute. I wanna make sure this thing gets nice and mixed. After I'm satisfied with the mixture, I'll be using just a very light amount of this powder until I'm very happy with the way the light's diffused. Prime the pump first so it's nice and, okay, there we go. So 1 full pump, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, let's start out with 27, and then now I have to do the exact same thing to here. Make sure it's primed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. All right, now I mix. This feels like a lot, right? This does feel like a lot, but I have to remember it exceeds a lot of surface area. Now, let's dilute it a little bit and see how she does. Okay, that's a little splash right there. See how much just that little bit of splash diluted this? It almost looks completely solid, you know? Still has some pretty good light through, but I have to remember this stuff is gonna dry clear. We'll do just a little bit more. Looks pretty cool, doesn't it? See how it's solid light, diffuse. Okay. Go ahead and pour that in as our first full batch. Now, if I want any sort of patterning, this would be the time. I can just kind of move it around, create almost kind of like some swirls, you know? That first layer is going to give us a lot of depth. I mean, really cool looking. Doesn't appear to be leaking or draining out of any of these corners here, which is really good. It's got a cool texture pattern to it, which was what I was going for. Now there are just a handful of small bubbles. I'm gonna give it about 10 minutes, let any more bubbles that wanna rise to the surface. Then if I just hit it with some heat, like a little blowtorch, it should pull out those bubbles, almost like a vacuum. All right, so now I'm gonna let this sit for about 3 hours, come back down here, and then do another one. Oh man, I messed up. It's been an hour and it's already hard. It dried in under an hour. It did make these cool ripples. However, there is a crack here. See that? Made this like crystal clear glass instantly. I think I can save it. I'm gonna try. I'm hoping that's the only crack that I have, and I'm hoping that if I apply a second layer, fill that crack and it won't be noticeable from the other side. Maybe just because it's so thick, it hardens so fast. We have our second layer poured. About the halfway mark now. I'll have to go get more of the hardener tomorrow. I'm actually out. All right, this one actually cured even faster. And there's only two things that have remained consistent, is that A, the batch was bigger, and B, I used more acrylic powder, which to me says one of two things, that A, the batch being too big is what caused it to cure so fast, or two, that the acrylic powder is acting as like an added catalyst. Probably due to just it being a really big batch. I think that's the most plausible one here. So now, for the next 2, probably even 3 pours, I'm gonna be doing just clear. All right, so I've got my last layer of epoxy nice and poured. This wood was just slightly taller than the other side, which is fine. I knew that was gonna happen. We managed to get basically crystal clear epoxy all the way to the very last pour. Just got me some bubbles here, but this is gonna be sanded down anyway, so it doesn't even matter. I assume that's just probably like moisture or air or something leaving the wood, because it only happened on the wood. And our clip stayed nice and sealed. I was really worried about the epoxy heating up too much and leaking through my ghetto duct tape that sealed it off, but looks good to me. So now all we need to do is take it all apart, and I hope I can do that without breaking it. This is the issue that I knew I would run into as well. See, I knew that the MDF was going to absorb some of it and get stuck to it. There is a coating you can put on wood and stuff to resist the epoxy from sticking. However, I didn't do that because I'm lazy, I guess. Of course, it would be easiest to probably pry this off, but I left all of my screwdrivers, my flatheads, and I'm not joking, in my truck, which is getting serviced right now. The whole front suspension is being replaced. Last night I came in here and I sanded this top down and I got this nice and glassy smooth. Started kind of shaping how I wanted my center console shape to be, I guess, which I'm going to have to re-smooth out the top here. As far as the surface looks great. It's the exact glossy texture that I wanted. Problem is that there's still some rough spots in the wood up here. It's hard to tell, but there's epoxy that goes all the way over here. And there's a couple of dips. Like there's a little spot here that wasn't even, in here and there as well. So what I'll do is I'll plane this out as best I can with the palm sander until, you know, everything's nice and even the way I like it. And then I'll stain it the color that I want. I think I'm gonna go with a dark brown. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and palm sand the top, get it nice and smooth, and then work my way around it, you know, and make sure everything looks as good as possible. All right, so I did a little bit of work off camera, nothing that was super interesting, just got all the edges nice and contoured the way I want them to match the OEM lid cover. I'm very happy with the shape and the design of this thing as of right now. I even, using my router, chunked out little sections here for the arms that go in here to mount to the actual lid itself. Basically that just is what clamps onto the lid right here. These two arms that are spring loaded just kind of clamp in here, and I'll clean all this up when I go to mount it up. I'm not even gonna really worry about this. I am ready to do my stain, and then I'll do my epoxy clear over it, which is just a brown mahogany gel stain. I think I like that the best. And as you can see here, there's like a couple of spots, right, where there's basically chunks missing here. Because I am limited on space, you know, I want to make sure that the dimensions match the OEM one, and height is kind of a big factor in this. I can only go so low, and I do really like this like perfectly imperfect look. So when I go to finally seal, the last step is going to be applying a final coat of epoxy to kind of seal this, you know, just nothing crazy thick, a 1/16 of an inch thick as my final coating. It'll give the whole thing that really glossy look that I want. It'll fill in these little chunks here. They'll still be visible, but they'll be smooth like glass, and I think that'll look really cool. It's, like I said, perfectly imperfect, you know. If it's not super glossy, it can absorb it a little bit, and it can be rubbed out, it can be polished out without damaging the wood. It's just would make my life a little bit harder, you know? So nothing I do is really permanent, and the good thing about wood is that it's very forgiving. Well, maybe not necessarily forgiving, but it's really easy to work with compared to metal. Take my rag here, dip a little bit in. Lastly, now that I've got my final style, I'm very happy with the way this looks. I gave it kind of like a weathered look between scratching it up and then filling the scratches in with, and using the blowtorch a little bit, kind of heat up certain areas. I used it for two reasons, because, so if you hit the wood while the stain is still wet, you know, while it still hasn't dried completely, it'll actually start to kind of bring the stain out to the surface, and you can remove some of it. You don't always get a whole lot out of it. Kind of a last resort method, because you can definitely burn the wood. However, I wanted that kind of burnt wood look to it, you know? I have to apply a thin coat of epoxy over the whole thing, and that'll not only fill in these holes and make them flush, it will also protect the whole thing and give it that last shiny look that I really want. All right, so I'm just gonna pour a little bit on it for right now. Then, using a brush, just kind of paint it on everywhere. I'm not worried about leaving any brush strokes. As it sets, it'll smooth itself out. And here is our finished epoxy top. Absolutely love the gloss. Gorgeous. However, there are some imperfections like this. You see they look like drips. I had this thing flipped upside down to do the back side of it, and I just completely forgot to tape off this area. I really should have taped off this area, and I didn't, which means that now I have a bunch of little these permanent drips on here. That means I was really hoping to just leave it at this gloss, this final gloss. There are some imperfections in it, like there's like little nicks and whatnot in here that I was totally cool with, that maybe just a little bit of trash or maybe a bubble formed at the last second, I'm not really sure. I was totally cool with leaving those in here until this part. This is my own fault. So I will have to polish this. I'm gonna have to sand this down, probably using about 800 grit, then from 800 to 1000 to 1500 to 2000, and then I have to polish this whole surface. And I mean, if I'm sanding this down, I might as well attempt to rectify. There's a couple other imperfections that, since I'm now forcing myself to do this, I might as well go and do that. So that's what I'm gonna do. It's a shame because I think I actually really like the satin look to it. You know, it almost gives it more of a synthetic look. You know, I don't feel like, you know, the detail is kind of compressed. And honestly, I feel like the satin look kind of fits a little bit better, but I'd still like to get this to a mirror finish. And she is done. Oh my gosh, what a challenge this whole thing has been, both mentally and physically. You never think that it would hurt you, but every now and again it does. Are there some imperfections? Of course. I made it, so obviously there's some imperfections. There's probably not very much that you guys will notice. In here I still gotta clean this out. That's probably my biggest concern. And there's still a couple of probably can't even see them with the camera, but there's some very light, not even surface scratches anymore. They're more like waves at this point. I gotta say though, this diamond acrylic compound by Glass Technology, I've used this stuff on my knives before, never really had a good result because it was different. But on this black polishing pad, the finishing polishing pad, it was incredible. I tested it out on the green pad to see how it did, and I was very impressed in just a short amount of time how much it improved. I would say that this finish is better than the clean epoxy finish. Plus, I was able to get all the imperfections out in the corners. I did get a little too close here. As of right now, I'm gonna call this done. I'm very happy with the way this has turned out. I've always been nervous because every time I've tried to polish stuff, I've just never gotten the finish that I want. And I am beyond impressed with the way this has come out. And I cannot wait to put this in the truck, which is obviously not here. I just have the Ram here right now. Get a good idea of just the depth of the epoxy here. The camera might not pick it up so well, but I'm very happy. Gosh, I cannot believe it. Wow. Let's turn out the lights and go upstairs. So that sounds really rough. That sounds really weird. I've got color changing LEDs in my bedroom because of who I am as a person. Let's go run this underneath that and see how it looks. You see me? Anyway, guys, I want to say thank you guys for watching. I want to say also thank you to our sponsor of this video. Really appreciate it. It makes things like this that go into here, which is like just, it's a cluster, dude. There's just like explosions and people screaming 24/7 in this mess of a head. So for people to like want to be like, hey, you know, we want to give that guy some money sometimes. Like, help me make stuff that really would sound impossible. So I appreciate that a lot. Like, please continue to do that. Now, because I don't have my truck with me and I need to get this video out, now because my truck is not here right now, it's actually getting the alignment and suspension done, I'm not gonna install it in this video. You'll have to see that in the next video. And there's a couple of small things I have to do to it, just little things here and there that I need to make sure that I'm happy with, and I will need to test fit it when I get it, so that might involve some minor trimming. But as far as aesthetically, like, it's done. So yeah, anyway guys, that is gonna close this video out for finally. I've been working on this thing for way too long. And I'm very happy to be done with this, and I'm very happy to move on to the next thing. But I'm also very excited to take a shower, put on some comfy clothes, have a couple beers, and go to sleep. That's how I roll. Anyway guys, see you in the next video.